Dear ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you again to our weekly translation of the Energy Forum 2021, which this year is a YouTube channel and the YouTube cluster. I'm your host, Robert Juodka, and it's my great pleasure to present you this annual Energy Forum that is being organized by the Estonian Chamber of Commerce in Lithuania and the Polish-Lithuanian Chamber of Commerce in Lithuania, PRIMUS law firm, and our dear partners, the Estonian Embassy, the Polish Embassy in Lithuania, other dear partners, and the whole event is powered by green energy leader in the Baltic countries, ENEFIT. Last week we covered energy issues and the development of market participation and the public markets by ENEFIT, and the CEO of the whole ENEFIT group was giving his presentation. Mr. Hando Sutter was and is our great supporter and they gave a really interesting presentation on the strategic developments within the Baltic region on energy and electricity sectors, as well as on the strategic development of the company and what consumers can and will benefit from these new developments and new changes in the structure of the company and in the structure of energy generation. And today we are having another distinguished speaker from the energy sector, Mr. Vytenis Koryzna, who is the CEO of ENEFIT Lithuania. And ENEFIT Lithuania obviously is one of the main players in the Lithuanian energy market, very active participant in the liberalization of the electricity market, and also via ENEFIT Group, it's also a major energy producer in Lithuania and the Baltics, obviously. Today's topic that will be covered by Vytenis concerns sustainability. As said, last time we covered a lot of issues about the company, about the macroeconomy, about what the macro trends are, but this time Vytenis will talk more about specific issues and also not forgetting the macro view on how the green energy and how the energy mix has to be sustainable in order to actually save the current situation and not to make it worse, and not to make our environment and our economies deteriorate. And oftentimes we hear a lot of talk about that, but Vytenis will no doubt help us understand what could be the impact of each of us, each of our business, each of our households, how to mitigate the potential negative effects, and also have benefits for ourselves, for our businesses, for our households, how this whole system could be beneficial to everyone. So without further ado, dear Vytenis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert, and always pleasure to participate in the initiatives by Energy Forum, by Estonian Chamber of Commerce. Very glad to be here. And yes, thank you for indeed a very thorough presentation of the topic. And I would perhaps even make it even more narrow and concrete towards the sustainability overall. And as you can see in the presentation in the top slide, the key question I'm trying to address here is sustainability. Is it a fashion or necessity? I guess it's still a question whether this question should be raised. And I believe that taking into account all the recent developments, especially the very recent COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, we see numerous facts showing that we are facing a problem, and the problem has to be addressed both on a macro level, on the global economies, global country scale, as well as on the individual level. But let's look into the problem in a very simple and straightforward way. So I think it's essential for each of us, each of the individuals, really understand what kind of challenge we are facing here. So is there really a problem? So eventually, now we have seen some hard facts, and we have suffered some hard facts on ourselves already. So this summer has been the hottest summer in Europe since the 1990s. So one of the hottest summer in decades, +1 degree Celsius. During the summer, we have seen such events as the floods in Germany, which required more than 180 human casualties, as well as resulted in numerous losses, direct around 5 billion euro that were direct insurance company other losses. Hurricane Ida in United States resulted in more than 40 billion USD losses. So overall, the number of climate events has tripled since 1980s. So if at that time we were having around 250 critical events a year, now we are having more than 750 critical events. So that is getting really very serious. All of this is also impacting the migration of people. And we see that almost 20 million people are changing their place of residence every year. Mostly looking on the global scale, those people are coming from such regions which are most ocean related, like Cuba, Fiji, Philippines. However, still in Europe, we see such countries as Italy, Greece, Spain, where heat waves are making people change their place of residence. So far, Earth temperature has increased by 1 degree Celsius since 1880s. And unfortunately, we see a further steady growth of the climate. And if nothing will be done, the overall climate temperature may rise up to 5 degrees by the end of the century. So imagine if now we see all those climatic changes with the 1 degree change, what will be when the climate will be changed and temperature increased by up to 5 degrees. So what is really causing the climate warming? And yes, I guess we all know that it's all about the CO2 emissions. And here the Japanese professor, whose name is Yoichi Kaya, has developed a Kaya identity, which directly relates to the key factors that are impacting the CO2 emissions. So first of all, of course, it's the population, it's us. And as a matter of fact, in my mind, it has always been that globally there are 6 billion of people. That is something I learned at school at a certain grade. But now I imagine that, hey, 20 years has passed since I finished the school, and now we have 8 billion people globally. So plus 2 billion people in less than 20 years. So that's quite a development. So of course, it's about the people, so population, because we are willing to live a more comfortable, a more technology-based lives. We are willing to travel, we are willing to entertain ourselves, and all of this is linking us to the GDP growth. So GDP per capita is one of the key targets of every single country, every single economy. And of course, very naturally, that GDP has to be stimulated by energy. So we need energy to accelerate the GDP. It's the essential engine of the GDP growth and overall economical processes. And unfortunately, energy is the key source of the CO2 if the energy is being produced from non-renewable, so-called brown energy, fossil fuel-based sources. So here we have the dilemma. Should we really chase for GDP growth, or perhaps we should put it aside, and perhaps we should look into some other means like the happiness factor? As a matter of fact, yes, according to the happiness factor, 4 countries out of top 5 globally are based in North Europe, which is mostly developing energy from renewable sources. But I guess switching from GDP to happiness factor won't change our lives to good. So we have those fundamental targets already in our DNA. And I guess the right direction is to find a way how we can develop our lives, our economies in a sustainable way. In a sustainable way, meaning in full harmony with our environment, so that we don't take it, and if we take it, we give it back. So eventually, what is the global response? So of course, the initiatives are there. And first of all, it has been the Kyoto Protocol back in 1997, which has been signed by a number of countries already committing to a certain initiatives that would limit the climate growth, the climate impact growth. However, most relevant agreement for us is the Paris Climate Change Agreement, according to which a very clear goal has been set that by the year 2050, globally, we are getting closer to zero emissions, and especially European Union is becoming a climate neutral economy and society. And at the same time, we are willing to limit the increase of temperature to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. So temperature increase is the key factor here. So we are willing to control the temperature increase globally. Of course, now the Paris Climate Agreement initiatives and goals are being transferred to the country or regional goals. And here in European Union, we are having one of the instruments called the European Green Deal, which is one of the most important instruments in supporting, partially subsidizing various sectors in our economy in order that they would be developed in fully sustainable way. So that is the instrument where we get all the support for our solar park developments, for our transportation switch to EV, for the residential building renovations, and so on. Yeah, so what really lies ahead? And speaking about the temperatures and the emissions. So at the moment, we globally are emitting more than 40 billion tons of CO2 annually. Now, if we are doing nothing and we continue as we do it right now, we may hit the line which is here represented in dark red color, which results in more than 120 billion CO2 tons annually by the end of the century. Now, the dotted blue line represents the best possible scenario where we are meeting the Paris Climate Agreement goals by 2050 to hit the zero emissions and to get back to a neutral impact to the environment. So those socio-economic pathways are representing different scenarios on what could be the different approaches towards the climate change. So here is the CO2 perspective, but at the same time, we can see how that directly translates to the temperature. And here you can see that, yes, if we are doing nothing and we are continuously increasing the CO2 emissions, we are easily hitting the 5 degrees increase by the end of the century. 5 degrees increase, which I wouldn't like to go into speculations how the world will look like at that point. However, if we are hitting the zero CO2 emissions, then we are moving towards the dotted line blue curve. And here you can see that even we are hitting the CO2 at zero level, the temperature increase, it is sufficient just to stop the increase. So we are slightly bending the curve towards the positive development in terms of temperature decrease, but this impact is very, very vague. So the key thing is to stop the temperature increase. And of course, in order to bend it backwards so that it starts decreasing back to normal position, that would require even another effort, but that is the goal that I believe will be a goal for our next generation. So here are the scenarios, right? How does the climate really affect our well-being? And what are the real scenarios, what we see nowadays in the globe, in our planet? So first of all, the most common issue, what we hear on the news is that the both North and South Pole ice is melting. What does that mean? Ice is white color, a huge millions of square kilometers of white color, which is reflecting back all the heat, all the sun heat that is coming from the atmosphere. It is being reflected back to the atmosphere. So basically all of those two white lands, they are acting as two huge air conditioners, basically conditioning our planet. While it melts, it goes away. Then all the summer heat, all the sun heat is being absorbed by the oceans, by the land and the oceans, which then gets us to the ocean temperature increase, which in the same time is increasing the ocean acidity, reducing the pH. What does that mean? That in line means that we are reducing the carbonate amounts in the water, which is the main building block in seawater, and such ecosystem, as the coral reefs will be the first ones to suffer, and it's already happening. The coral reefs are dying completely. We have up to 5, max 10 years to see all the beauty of those ecosystems. So if anyone of the listeners hasn't yet started diving, I suggest to do it immediately, because that is soon to become extinct. Amazon forests, rainforests, also one of the hot topics, and unfortunately, close to half of those rainforests have been already eliminated. By switching those to other agricultural types of different products like palms plantations. What's the problem? The problem is that those rainforests, they are a closed ecosystem. They are self-generating sufficient humidity to keep the necessary levels of water or humidity to maintain the ecosystem as it is. While we are removing parts of it, the rainforest won't generate the necessary humidity. Then eventually those areas will become seasonally drying out, and then eventually will dry out completely. So we are losing loads of potential to absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere. Now, we also have heard stories, read stories like in, for example, Russia, where huge craters are being opened in the various lots of the northern parts of the country. So what happens? The permafrost, the permanent ice, which has been there for thousands, hundreds of thousands years, is melting. And that means that it's melting. All the land goes into the mud. And the worst thing is that the methane is being released to the atmosphere. In line with that, we also, if we get the fire on, then we have both the CO2, direct emissions, all the heat coming and affecting the atmosphere and heating up very directly and delivering a very negative effect. So I guess the scenarios are obvious, but let's also look into what's happening in our region, because one can say that, hey, so those rainforest, coral reefs, that's somewhere out of my sandbox. But let's look into our sandbox, the European sandbox, what's happening here. And here, it's a very nice piece of data reflecting on what are the regions in Europe here and how it is being affected by the climate change. So in the dark yellow color, you can see, for example, the Mediterranean areas, which I would say are affected the mostly. What's happening? Heat extremes, increasing droughts and forest fires, which naturally reduces the crops in the fields and increase in energy demand. So that all of that is driving economical and social problems. One of those, as I mentioned, the change of living place and the migration. Now looking into the green area, the continental region, we have seen the floods in Germany caused by very heavy precipitation. We have seen the increasing risk of forest fires because of certain periods of drought. And all of this is decreasing the economical value of the forest and decreasing the potential of all the agricultural initiatives. And yes, all of this is again increasing the socioeconomical problems. Now we, in the Baltic countries, in the Northern Europe, we are living in the Borealic region. And the Borealic region is, as a matter of fact, quite a comfortable place to stay, assuming all the climate change. And yes, we may likely see more rain. We may likely see hotter summers and a bit cooler winters for a while. However, our economic is growing. We are getting kind of a higher income. We can afford hotter summers, some cooling in between, and cooler winters with the higher heating expenses, but we can afford that. However, even though that the short-term impact wouldn't be such crucial for us, we would see migration waves coming from other areas. So now if we see, and the problem nowadays we're solving is all the, let's say, political and economical migration, and we call them political or economical migrants. So soon we will have a completely new term called climate migrants. So all the people and all the huge loads of people moving and changing their location of residence because of the climate effect. Moving onwards, so what is happening in the world and how all the CO2 emissions have been developing gradually. And here you can see the time frame since the beginning of the 19th century. So you can see the European countries started emitting, then United States popped up. India and China have been staying on really minimal levels. Then after the Second World War, we see a very huge increase in emissions with all the economies booming, especially United States and the European Union. Then once China is moving from agricultural perspective towards industrial perspective, they are moving very heavily on the CO2 emitter side. At the same time, India is catching up. So what has been the actuals of the recent couple of decades? The United States, European Union, we have taken the trend of going down. However, China, India, and some other countries, they are still increasing their emissions. And here is, of course, the dilemma. How to continue on that. And even in the Glasgow conference last week, we have heard a very clear statement that China will still continue on the emissions at certain point when they will commit to start decreasing it. So we have an issue here, obviously. And on the other side, China has a very huge economy, a huge potential for innovative technologies. They have a huge potential to deliver carbon capture technology. So even if you are the emitter, but at the same time, you could balance that out with carbon capture technologies. And looking globally, we have more than 300 billion USD invested annually into various clean tech industries. So China could show their potential and deliver the opposite by reducing their impact. Now, looking into the sectors worldwide, which are mostly impacting the CO2 emissions. So here we obviously see that 73% of the emissions are coming from the energy as a whole, energy for heat, energy for electricity. So here we have as a split the energy in industry, transport, and the energy used in buildings. And if one would think that, hey, so all those energy is mostly emitted by industrial or commercial companies, players. So this is not really true. Because in the transportation segment, for example, the 60% of the total emissions is being delivered by private people. So private cars, motorcycles, buses, public transportation, and the remaining 40% is going to the commercial fleet, all the logistics companies mostly. At the same time, energy used in the buildings, you can see in the split in the graph that out of 17%, we have 11% coming from the residential buildings. So as the outcome, it all comes down to all of us as individuals. What kind of impact we are making? Are we making educated decisions? What kind of energy, how we are using it, how we are interacting with energy consumption and management. Now let's quickly have a look on what are the Europeans thinking about the climate change. And here is a quick look into the European Investment Bank survey delivered a bit more than 1 year ago, trying to understand the Europeans' opinions about how they consider the climate change and what statements do they agree with. So looking into the statement that climate change is irreversible, unfortunately, the biggest skeptics are the Eastern European countries, being Estonia, Lithuania. So yes, unfortunately, more than 40% believe that it's irreversible, meaning what can I do about it? However, the Mediterranean countries, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Spain, they already feel the impact and they believe that something can be done about it. So that is a good sign, something we can learn from them. Looking into the statement on I don't believe in climate change at all, the average total European perspective is only 9% who don't believe in climate change. So that's, I would say that it's quite an okay result. Then again, looking into the country split, again, we have Eastern countries like Estonia. We also have Germany, which I guess from one side is still kind of emitting quite a lot of CO2, but they are one of the committers to reduce those emissions. So I believe that the awareness in the country is exponentially growing, understanding the problem. At the same time, looking into the overall, what kind of biggest challenges the European citizens are facing. So among the top three, we have the top number one, economic and financial issues that people are facing. Obvious, I guess it has been in the top list in any kind of situation, in whatever the period or stage of the development we have been in. On the second place, yes, we have climate change. And third place is the access to healthcare and health services overall, obviously stimulated by the present COVID situation. So the good news, we have climate change as a top 3 agenda in regular Europeans' mind. So that is a good part. I believe that we understand that the problem is there, and we have to eventually find the means how the best way to address this issue. Let's look into some examples. And amongst the top, a country which is quite far away from us, the South American country Uruguay, which as a matter of fact is very similar to Lithuania, because according to the World Bank data, they, according to the GDP per capita, we have been ranked number 83, and they have been ranked number 82 globally. So that means that also population-wise, they are very similar. They have around 3.5 million citizens, while we are having 3 million citizens. So very similar country, right? Back in 1997, they have faced a huge drought, meaning some of their capacities of electricity generation were built on hydro generation. And within this long-lasting drought, they had to import very expensive oil from Argentina in order to produce energy, which both increased the country debt, all the expenses, energy prices, and eventually the government came up to a bold decision to fully transfer their energy sector towards renewables. And during the course of 10 years, they have invested more than 7 billion USD into the wind energy sector. And eventually, now the country provides nearly 97% of its electricity. This whole initiative has contributed to over 15% of the national GDP, meaning that it's already an asset that is generating the return in terms of employment, in terms of capital investments, and so on. So very clear and dedicated, committed strategy within the country officials has delivered very quick and bold results for the country. So good example to take the example from. Now, looking into the company perspective, of course, now we have a number of international companies who are doing really the right thing towards the climate change. And yes, we see here a number of companies like Facebook, Google, who are global players who don't even have another choice than to commit to net zero, to giving back to the environment what has been taken from it. And of course, both Facebook, Google, other companies are already using fully green renewable energy for quite a while already. And they have a number of other initiatives involving their all the value chain, all their suppliers, their employees, their customers. Amongst the top also is IKEA, which has a very clear mission, becoming people and planet positive, engaging customers into circular economy initiatives and principles. Recently, IKEA has become an energy supplier for private sector in Sweden, which, in my opinion, is not that much goal-oriented towards additional revenues, rather than offsetting the carbon footprint that the company has left behind. Microsoft has made a very bold statement to capture all of its emissions that it has emitted throughout the history since 1975. So gain back whatever has been emitted by the year 2050. So full compensation of all of the operations and all of the negative impact that the company has created. So those are the great global examples. And of course, then we as representatives of the company, we should also think, so what is my relation with the climate change, what our company can do about it? And thinking about the major trends on how the change will happen. So of course, nowadays we see a lot of businesses start emerging from the sustainability idea. Like in the Baltics and Lithuania, we see, for example, a car sharing company, which is using only green EV fleet. We see a number of food or agricultural initiatives which have shifted fully to sustainable operation development. So that is one perspective when the companies are being established based on a green agenda. Then at the same time, most of the traditional regular businesses, they either will be pushed by its value chain or eventually will have to push its value chain towards sustainable operations. Because the key thing is about the consumers. all of us who are making educated decisions about the products and services. And as soon as we will start pushing the brands that we prefer to move into the right direction of sustainability, the sooner we will see the effects and the final outcome, positive outcome. And eventually, of course, it all comes with the regulatory perspective as well. So we need the regulatory perspective to push towards sustainability. And here, definitely, we have a very clear perspective coming from the European Union. Actually, this year, during April, a new directive called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive has been admitted and approved, by which most of the companies will have to start reporting sustainability perspective gradually. So the first wave will hit in the year 2023, then the year 26. There are certain criteria like turnover above 40 million euro, total assets above 20 million euro, more than 250 employees within the company. So that will define which companies will start reporting sooner. At the same time, the taxonomy document has been admitted, which defines what kind of activities are to be defined as sustainable activities. But eventually, I guess that the thing that we should start looking into right now is the ESG, environmental social governance reporting, which basically allows the companies to identify their bottlenecks, their present situation, how they are engaged with those three perspectives, what are the practices they're using, and that would allow to take the right steps in remediating certain negative sides or anything. And the environmental perspective, which is mostly important for us, it mostly focuses on three scopes. So we have scope 1, which is the direct emissions. Direct emissions from the direct company perspective, from owned asset and production, if the company is producing, what kind of emissions it is delivering to the atmosphere. Then scope 2 is mostly about the purchased electricity for own use, purchased heat, steam, and cooling. And then scope 3 is all the indirect emissions, like all the value chain, purchased goods, services for the production, the waste, transportation, which is needed in between, and then so-called downstream and upstream perspective. And then the downstream perspective is all of the life cycle of the product or service on the customer side. So how the customer is using the product, how it is being recycled, and so on. So scope 1 and scope 2 are rather easy to understand and report. Scope 3 is quite a bit more complicated. And eventually that very much differs sector by sector. So whoever from the listeners would be interested in understanding more details, we are happy to discuss and talk in more detail all of those reporting issues and how the company, where should they start from. Now, eventually, what are the benefits? So benefits of all of this is of course very straightforward. So it comes directly from the operational cost reduction. It is facing also the business development from the financing perspective, because the central banks will eventually be more preferable to invest and support financially the businesses that are more sustainable rather than which are more CO2 emitted. So the cost of borrowing money will increase for those who are not compliant. Employee engagement and motivation is definitely a factor to be mentioned here. The company which is moving towards sustainable operations is also kind of a building up the brand and its reputation, being known that we are caring not only about us and our profit, but we are caring about the society, about the people around us, about all the partners and suppliers. So we are more socially responsible in that perspective. This is building up the sustainability of a brand, which naturally increases the value of overall business. So I believe we don't have other way than going the sustainability way. And thinking about the Eesti Energia and what we are doing in this direction. So first of all, it's the shift towards renewables. Here, yes, the Eesti Energia has been the company which has been quite a lot focused to the fossil fuels, with energy being developed from oil shale. Nowadays, we are fully going to the renewables. We already are the biggest wind energy producer in the Baltic region. We are committed to remain in this position in long term. So quite a few developments are ongoing. We are also kind of signing up the energy offtake or purchase agreements from independent developers. And we are looking into the projects that can fully make a big impact to the energy market with bigger projects like the Riga offshore wind park, which is located in the Latvian and Estonian border in the sea, which is planned to be from 1,000 to 2,000 megawatt capacity, which would likely deliver from 3 to 7 terawatt hours electricity annually. So that is a huge impact that can really fully transform our Baltic energy industry. Now, what are the lowest hanging fruits for the companies to think of is one of the solutions is the power purchase agreement. And this year, we have really been very successful in offering the solution for the businesses in Lithuania, in Latvia and Estonia, signing up the power purchase agreement, which has a very long term, well, relatively, it lasts from 5 to even 12 years. But the customer is fixing the price, thus avoiding all the price volatility in the market. And at the same time, energy is being supplied from local energy sources, meaning that the full energy that the customer is consuming, it's coming from renewable sources. So that is one of the perspectives. And overall, I would say that the role and the mission of ours in this market is not only to transform our operations toward the renewable and not only supply the customers with the green energy solutions, but also look into the broad picture and see what are the means that we can help our business customers, private customers in their journey to zero. And it covers all the range of solutions from, as said, energy supply, EV fleet modernization, charging solutions, lighting solutions to private customers, that will eventually allow private customers to manage their consumption in the most efficient way, thus reducing the consumed volume and at the same time shifting it fully to renewable green energy based asset. So coming back to the initial question, so is the sustainability a fashion or a necessity? There is no doubt. It's a new reality. There is no other way than to take this direction. So electrification, it is the fastest way to reduce the CO2 emissions. We have no other way. We will take this direction, and we are welcoming everyone, all the businesses, all the private customers to join us with our journey to zero. So with this, I guess those were the key messages I wanted to deliver. So we are welcoming everyone to take our discussions one-to-one if anyone in interest. Yes, so thank you for listening.
Thank you, Vytenis.
Over to you.
Thank you indeed, Vytenis, for a very, very thorough and interesting presentation on the global trends and also local trends, what is being happening in the Baltic region in the renewable sector. A few questions. I mean, obviously, we have now two, let's say, converging trends. One trend is that obviously the local Baltic energy systems are more and more transforming into the renewable power generation sources. And the other trend, obviously, everybody's aware of, is that the prices are increasing drastically. And for many years, renewable energy, at least in this part of the world, was considered to be a source of energy that has to be subsidized. And obviously, that brings everyone to the thought that renewable energy will cost more, and obviously it will be not that efficient as the traditional energy. So what is your opinion about that, and what is the actual situation in your eyes?
Yeah, so I would say that nowadays we have seen energy prices skyrocketing, right? So this year we see energy prices tripling from what we had last year. And I guess this answer has already been answered. It has been well discussed even on the European Union level. And the very clear answer is that the shift towards renewables, it's inevitable, both because of the need towards the climate issues, but at the same time, in order to control the market pricing. So it's inevitable. So now we are already we have already seen that the market prices has hit the heights which are way above the actual cost of generating electricity from renewables. So I think that we have a totally favorable situation to very actively and very drastically even develop renewable energy resources. The key question, whether we will have sufficient for all.
Yes, yes. So essentially, the price increase actually is very favorable to renewable development, actually. That is the short answer.
Yes, it is. But I mean, I think that it has been even too high, and we don't need to have such high prices in order to move in the development perspective. So,
that leads me to the second question. I mean, you were mentioning also businesses and consumers, how consumers or businesses have to or could behave in this current environment. Some of them have prices that are electricity prices that are not fixed, that are moving along with the market. Obviously, some of them would like to fix the prices. So, what could be the solution for every consumer in this area?
Yeah, so I guess that the answer is a very individual perspective. And well, let's take separately private and business customers. So from the business customers perspective, as said, we have a very well proven track of a product called the PPA, which allows the customer to fix the price for a long term at a very reasonable level, well below today's energy market prices. And that has been a well-proved solution chosen by a number of customers. There have been more than 150 companies who signed up for this during this year, more to come. But at the same time, those who are not willing to enter the long-term agreement, of course, now the key question is that whether to fix or not to fix. And I guess our suggestion is still to monitor the market. Now we see a downshift in the price. I guess springtime will be the moment when we see when we can benchmark on the long-term pricing perspective. So whether we will follow a regular seasonality trends up till spring or not, that will define how the close future may look. Then that will define whether to remain with the open risk with a spot price or fix it for a shorter term. And then on the private perspective, of course, the key thing is to understand that if you're choosing the spot product, then you should benchmark and compare the prices long term. So you should take your spot at least on a 2-3 years average price, and then compare it against the would have signed fixed price level. That would be the right way to do things. The worst situation is that when you see the price is picking up, then you would get into panic and say, okay, now I'm fixing it, and then you would get a very high fix. That is the worst thing. So same time as if you are trading stocks and the prices start falling, you immediately start selling off. Perhaps you start selling off partially, but not everything for sure. So I guess that's the common principles apply here. And of course, there are certain customers segments like the ones who are already having the solar power plant or planning to implement. So for those, very naturally, the key answer is to move towards this spot contract, because energy market has, on a day's perspective, has certain peaks. These peaks are usually in the daytime, exactly when the solar production is happening. You won't face the high peak energy prices from Nord Pool, but then you will be consuming from Nord Pool in nighttime when the prices are much lower or even negative. And the spread between the max and min prices in the market on a daily basis, it will be increasing the further we go, because the share of renewables is going to be increasing. And the further we go, the more we will see the situations where at nighttime, we are having even negative energy price. So that means that, hey, if I have the electric vehicle, I can turn on my heater, I can turn on my air conditioning. The house is a substance that doesn't emit all the heat or cooling very fast. It's inertive. So that is the way how things should be developing forward. And of course, controlling your expenses, installing the PV, installing the battery for even a higher efficiency.
Very interesting. So you mentioned installation of batteries and usage of all these, novel energy management solutions, I would say. So if you could very shortly elaborate, what could be the other potential technological breakthroughs that could help, manage the price increases, manage the expenses in energy?
Yes, very good question. So I mean, what are those technological breakthroughs? And I believe that a very important initiative, at least in Lithuania nowadays, is the smart meters and smart meter rollout that is being developed by the local DSO, ESO. And next year we will have a massive rollout of the project. And in line with smart meters, which will give hourly or even in 15-minute in intervals the customer consumption, in line with the IoT technologies, we will have a totally different perspective on how the customer can be enabled to manage their consumption by switching most energy intense assets like EV, like heating, ventilation, AC, to the brain, to certain controlling body, which would eventually tell all the algorithm and all the logic. So when we are consuming the electricity produced by the PV, when we are taking it from the grid, when we are putting it for storage to the grid or to the battery that we have. So I would take here a perspective that we are technologically in some perspective that the telecom operators were some 25 years ago, when we were just having a phone, an old Nokia, with using just for phones and for calls and SMS, nothing more. But it took for the operators more than 20 years to develop the technology infrastructure, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, the development of the mobile devices, all the apps, all the content that we have on the mobile devices, on the smartphones. And we will go through a very similar perspective with energy. But we will do it much faster because all of the technology items are already in place. We just need to connect separate dots together and the value will be more than obvious.
So connecting the dots and let's say releasing the value chain, that is hidden in our current, let's say, even energy usage that we don't even are aware of, most of the time, that we can actually earn from batteries, from your Tesla battery, for example, and give your Tesla battery energy to the grid and earn money on that. Nobody's even thinking in that way. But that is a real possibility, even today, with some to come and existing technology solutions. But a few last words, and then my last question concerning liberalization. Obviously, it's a very Lithuania-based question, but Lithuania announced the liberalization of the so-called second wave of consumers by 31st December 2021. Because of the rapid increase of energy prices, this deadline has been shifted for 6 months into 2022. Now it's 1st July 2022. And obviously, you as ENEFIT, you are one of the energy suppliers, one of the main participants in this process of liberalization of the consumer markets. So in your opinion, your expert opinion, what consequences will have the current decision to postpone the deadline of liberalization of the
Yeah, of course. So it is to be mentioned that definitely we have a problem. Prices are sky high, and unfortunately, end users, private users, they are confusingly relating it with the market opening, with the liberalization itself, though it has nothing to do with the liberalization. It's just the market that has come up to such price levels. And the regulator, the government has decided to step in and to extend the period, which is, of course, a good thing that they are thinking of the consumer, thinking of their expenses, and thinking how to help them manage the increasing expenses potentially. The downside of this is that we are speaking only about the part of the market, only the second wave users who would get and face this benefit of staying with a public supply for a longer term. But nothing comes for free. There is no free lunch. Even though that regulated price will be lower than the actual market price. So that means that someone will have to cover the difference. And surprise, surprise, the difference is being covered by all of us, either from the tax payment perspective or directly from the DSO perspective, or the regulator perspective within the energy field. So even though the benefit will be gained by a certain segment of the market, but the cost of this benefit will be paid by all the market. So we are taking from all and putting it to a certain segment. Is that fair? I'm leaving it as an open question, but to my personal opinion, that is not exactly the right way. And regulation always leads to certain downsides. As a second part is what kind of signal with such a initiative we are sending to potential market players. Isn't it limiting the future competition? Isn't it suggesting that, hey, the market is still kind of regulated and the political risk of entering such a business is really high? Eventually, all the present suppliers are naturally facing costs because of some customers will decide to move to the public supply, which is their perfect choice, and that is what part of them will do. So that means that there is some cost related to that. That people are raising questions. People need to be aware of what's happening. Of course, people are calling to the suppliers and they want to be aware, managing all of this information flow and all the questions coming in. It's a huge expense at the same time. So, from one side, there is this nice intention to provide a benefit for the customer or certain group of the customer, but eventually the big picture suggests that it creates a much higher cost and negative impact than the value for the segment. But of course, the decision has been done. We are complying and we are suggesting our customers what is the best value for them in utilizing the situation to its best. And eventually we will continue with our mission to supply green local energy to the market and to commit and to kind of allow our customers to deliver a higher value, not just getting the electricity supply, but also impacting our climate for a better good.
Thank you very much, Vytenis, indeed, for this positive note. And yeah, there has been the saying that think globally, act locally. So essentially, every one of us can think globally, act locally, by installing solar power plants on your roofs, or let's say on your spare land plot, or participation in the so-called distant prosumer schemes, where you as a consumer buy capacity that is generated in some other electricity or solar or wind power plant that is distant from your type of consumption. That is also possible. So the technical and legal and structural possibilities are here. You just have to use them. And obviously, ENEFIT is one of the companies that helps you do that on a tactical level and achieve these goals that are both beneficial to you and for the country and for the economy and for the environment and for the planet. So with this, thank you, Vytenis, once again, and we will meet at our next session on December 1st, where we will cover wind energy, offshore wind energy, with a distinguished speaker from Poland. And here today, I would like to thank you for participation, for listening, and also don't forget to subscribe to our Energy Forum channel on YouTube and be tuned to our news and our newest developments. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.